In 1933, a man named Li Ching-Yuen died. According to official Chinese government records, he was born in 1677. Do the math. That makes him 256 years old. Now, I know your instinct is probably screaming, "That's impossible." And that instinct, it's worth a closer look, because the question isn't whether one person actually lived for 256 years. The real question is, what do these records actually say? Who verified them? And is there any biological mechanism that could even begin to explain it? If you care about longevity, if you've ever looked at the research on aging and wondered just how far the human lifespan can be pushed, this story is the most extreme data point that exists, and it's documented. This is not folklore. This is official. By the end of this video, you're not just going to know a fascinating story. You're going to understand exactly what the Chinese imperial records show, what modern gerontology says about the theoretical ceiling of human lifespan, and why this specific case has never been definitively closed. We're going to challenge your assumptions about what's possible. His name was Li Ching-Yuen, a Chinese herbalist, a martial arts practitioner, and according to multiple layers of Chinese documentation, a man who lived through parts of 5 different centuries. Now, I want to be precise with you from the start. This video is not going to tell you Li Ching-Yuen definitely lived 256 years. The evidence doesn't support that, and anyone who tells you otherwise is probably selling you something. What this video is going to do is walk you through exactly what the records say, where they come from, who verified them, what Li himself claimed about how he lived, and then hand that over to what modern biology actually says about extreme human longevity. Because the ceiling of human lifespan is one of the most contested questions in geroscience right now, and this case, it sits right at the very edge of it. Let's start with the hard evidence. The stuff you can't easily dismiss. In 1827, the Chinese Imperial Government issued a formal congratulatory message to Li Ching-Yuen, his 150th birthday. 50 years later, in 1877, they issued another one, this time for his 200th birthday. These are not folk stories. These are not village legends passed down through generations. These are documented government communications, referenced in Chinese historical records, and cited in a 1933 article in Time magazine that brought Li's case to Western attention right after his death. The Time article, published May 6, 1933, reported that a professor at Mingkuo University named Wu Chung-chieh had discovered imperial Chinese records confirming Li's birth year as 1677. Professor Wu's research was conducted in the context of Li's death, which had been reported across China as the passing of a man of extraordinary age. Wu Chung-chieh wasn't a tabloid writer. He was an academic operating within an institutional framework. His findings were treated as credible enough to be reported internationally. Now, does that prove Li was 256? No. Records can be faked. Dates can be but what it does prove is this. The claim is not a myth that emerged after his death. It was documented repeatedly by official institutions during his lifetime. That is a completely different category of evidence. And here is what makes it even harder to dismiss. The people who knew Li personally did undescribe him as ancient and decrepit. They described him as functional, physically capable, and mentally sharp, well into what should have been the final years of his life. Stay with me, because the next part is where it gets biologically strange. Li Ching-Yuen gave interviews. He spoke publicly about his life and his methods, and what he described was not mystical or supernatural. He identified 3 things as central to his longevity. First, diet. He was a herbalist by profession and by practice. His diet was primarily plant-based rice, wine in moderation, and an extensive range of Chinese medicinal herbs, with particular emphasis on goji berries, gatu kola, wild ginseng, and ishowu. These are not random ingredients. Several of them, like goji berries and ginseng, have been the subject of modern research into cellular aging and antioxidant activity. Second was movement. He practiced Qigong daily for his entire adult life. Qigong is a system of slow, deliberate movement and controlled breathing. It's not vigorous exercise in the Western sense. It is closer to what modern researchers would call a low-intensity, high-consistency, nervous system regulation practice. Third was his emotional state. This is the part that sounds the least scientific until you read the research. Li's reported advice was, keep a quiet heart, sit like a tortoise, walk sprightly like a pigeon, sleep like a dog. The common thread: minimizing physiological stress. Chronic stress, specifically elevated cortisol, is one of the most well-documented accelerators of cellular aging in the current neuroscience literature. A general in the Chinese army named Yang Sen met Li in 1927, when Li would have been 250 years old by his own account. Yang Sen was reportedly so struck by Li's physical condition that he had him photographed and wrote about the encounter. His account describes a man of normal height, excellent posture, and clear eyes. Not a man in physical collapse. I'm not asking you to accept that at face value. I'm asking you to hold it alongside the question of what we actually know about the upper limits of human biology. Because we need to talk about what science says, and the answer is more unsettled than most people realize. The oldest person whose age has been independently verified by modern standards was Jeanne Calment of France. She died in 1997 at 122 years and 164 days. 122 is the verified record. 256 is more than double that. So from a purely empirical standpoint, the gap is enormous. But here is where it gets complicated. In 2016, a study in the journal Nature argued that the maximum human lifespan has a fixed ceiling of about 115 years. Case closed, right? Not so fast. 11 months later, 5 separate research teams published responses in the same journal, disputing that methodology and those conclusions. The debate is still active, and it gets even stranger. In 2018, researchers in Italy, analyzing data from over 3,800 people aged 105 and above, found that after age 105, the annual probability of death stops increasing. It plateaus. This is called mortality deceleration, and it's not predicted by the standard biological model of aging. It suggests there may not be a hard biological ceiling. This doesn't prove anyone can live 256 years. It proves we do not fully understand what determines the outer edge of human lifespan. So let's put the counter-argument on the table plainly. The most likely explanation for Li Ching-Yuen's reported age is a combination of 2 factors: record error and deliberate inflation. In pre-modern China, birth registration was inconsistent. It's entirely plausible that Li was born much later than 1677, and that an early family record referring to a grandfather or great-uncle was misidentified as his own. This explanation is supported by Li's own inconsistency. In some accounts, he claimed to have been born in 1736, which would make him 197 at death, not 256. 197 is still wildly outside the verified human record, but the inconsistency undermines his self. The second factor is social and cultural. In traditional Chinese society, extreme old age carried significant status. A man of 256 was a living connection to another era, a figure of authority. The incentive to inflate an extreme age claim was not trivial. The historian Ira Milton Galoff noted that extreme age claims in pre-modern Chinese records should be read within a cultural framework that valued longevity as a marker of virtue. That context doesn't make the records false, it makes them ambiguous. But let's set the age question aside entirely for a moment. Whatever Li Ching-Yuen's true age was, the practices he described are directly mappable onto the current scientific literature on longevity. And that is independently interesting. In fact, it's revolutionary. Goji berries, which Li reportedly consumed daily, contain compounds that have demonstrated antioxidant and anti-inflammatory activity in cell studies. An anti-inflammatory diet is one of the most consistent predictors of longevity. Gatucola has been studied for its effects on cognitive function and cellular repair. He Shouwu has reported longevity associations in traditional Chinese medicine. He knew his stuff. His Qigong practice maps onto what modern researchers would describe as a parasympathetic nervous system regulation habit. Consistent activation of this rest and digest mode reduces cortisol, lowers chronic inflammation, and has been associated with longer telomere length in studies. Telomere length is one of the primary biological markers of cellular aging. Longer telomeres correlate with longer health span. Li Ching-Yuen did not have access to any of this research. He had 150 years of personal experimentation. Whether he lived 197 years or 256 or something else entirely, what he built his life around is not superstition. It is, in retrospect, a remarkably coherent longevity protocol. Here is the thing that nobody who covers this story talks about directly. The question, did Li Ching-Yuen live 256 years, is almost certainly unanswerable with the evidence we have. The records are real, but the verification standards of 17th century China are not the verification standards of a modern birth registry. We cannot resolve it. But that is not actually the most important question. The most important question is, what does it mean that the practices of a man who may have lived to an extraordinary age align almost exactly with what the most advanced longevity research in the world currently identifies as the primary levers of extended health: caloric moderation, anti-inflammatory diet, consistent low-intensity movement, nervous system regulation, social connection, purpose. By every dimension of what we now know about healthy aging, he was doing it right. Whether the number is 197, 256 or something we can't verify, he built a life that the biology says should work, and he built it 300 years before the science existed to explain why. That is not mythology. That is a data point we haven't fully read yet. So, Li, 256 years old according to Chinese imperial records, probably not literally 256. Almost certainly older than any verified age in history, definitely living a life that the best current longevity science would fully endorse. What do you do with that? I'd argue you start paying attention to the practices, not the number. The number is what makes the story famous. The practices are what made the story possible. If this shifted something for you, or if you think the evidence is stronger or weaker than I've laid it out, tell me below in the comments. The comments that challenge the argument are always the most interesting. Let's dig deeper. And if you want to go deeper on the biology of extreme human longevity, then make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell. We're just getting started. Li Ching-Yuen's story isn't just a historical curiosity. It's a profound challenge to our understanding of human potential. A ghost from the past, whispering secrets of the future. What if he wasn't an anomaly, but a blueprint? Think about that. Think about that.